Positive arousal would be a combination of happy and high arousal, and negative would be
anger. Right? That would be negative.
It's an interesting question. I mean, everybody in psychology says so,
but maybe it's not. If you're defending yourself because you've been pushed around too much, then maybe anger is a positive thing in this situation.
People almost always categorize anger as negatively violent affect,
not
but
pleasant.
well, you know, it depends. I think. I can remember some times when being angry was a lot of fun. And I certainly have worked with people who were down here quite a bit, for whom getting that arousal and tapping into some anger was a really good part of.
You get to act it out.
Well, or let it out. I mean, you don't always have to do it in the first way that crosses your mind. But there's a lot of discussions about whether holding anger back or overruling anger.
Yeah, in regards to that, arousal wouldn't necessarily be anything to do with action. It's feeling. Like you can still feel high arousal, but not do anything. But no one else would know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. It's an internal state. It tends to lead to some desire for action that doesn't always have to be as I say, the first action that comes to mind. And sometimes you could sit on it for a while. Now, it is one of the underlying ideas here is that the closer you are, the closer emotions are in this space, the easier it would be to transition among them. And one of the things I think can be interesting about the whole question about whether you, because actually, both erotic arousal and love don't typically get folded into emotion theories, and it's kind of interesting. But you think about people can move pretty easily from anxiety or fear to anger. People move from anger or fear to erotic feelings, and vice versa. So, it's why taking your girlfriend out to a scary movie is a good idea. Why makeup sex is so good. And presumably low arousal states and negatively valenced emotions and happy valenced emotions are easier to move between in some sense, or confusing fundamentally.
How do these states relate to something like bipolar, sort of where, you have this on top of maybe more longer-term cycles of...
But bipolar, I think, would be a whole different category.
But like this compared to more just stable personality traits?
Well, emotion is expected to be fluid and changing all the time. So you wouldn't, whether talked about last week in connection with neuroticism, somebody who's high on neuroticism would probably tend to be over in this sector more consistently somewhere in there. Somebody who's low on neuroticism would probably tend to be more like kind of a low arousal and maybe even towards neutral to happy, I suppose. On average, but emotions would be changing most of the time, moving around in response to things that are going on in the environment. Now, one of the things that the discussion between these two dimensions and the previous two dimensions leads to is things I don't think we probably have talked about so far yet, is that factor analysis resolves this constellation of variables into a couple of dimensions for you. And then one of the things that you do at the end of the exploratory factor analysis process is you rotate the dimensions that you get till you get the simplest pattern of loadings that you can follow. And ways built into the software to kind of do this for you. You can pick different options for how to do it. It just spins them around. It turns out that actually the distinction between these two dimensions and the sad happy dimensions is not a database distinction. It's a factor rotation distinction. The same pattern of data points about how different emotions relate to each other in these spaces, but it just depends. This version is just a rotation of the other version. So it's a matter of kind of which factor analysis result you prefer or find cleanest, or what you're kind of interested in, rather than something that's easily resolvable by data. But you do tend to look at, when you're with the arousal dimension in play, this would tend to guide research where you're looking at psychophysiological measures of arousal. So if you're interested in like heart rate, blood pressure, skin conductance kind of stuff, muscle tension, issues as signs of, people would often say signs of emotion, but probably more accurately the signs of this arousal dimension are in neuroscience. A lot of people focus on relative activation of the amygdala, which is part of the system in the brain that regulates emotion. But probably the amygdala is better understood as an indicator of arousal. And depending on who you read, maybe the particular kinds of arousal, but rather than whereas the sad, happy thing actually seems to be located more in the prefrontal cortex and in the cingulate gyrus. There's actually like whole kind of interacting systems of brain circuitry, which always strikes me as a very simple way of describing a very complicated situation that seem to underlie judgments about positive and negative impact feelings. Okay. And because that wasn't complicated enough, this is called the circumplex model of emotion. This is one of the more colorful versions of the circumplex model. But what this is trying to do is just to kind of point to that whole rotation aspect that I was just talking about, and saying you could actually break that whole pattern of rotation down into a lot of intersecting sectors, and so place different emotions along the different dimensions, if you might say load on one dimension or the other. And again, one of the ideas would be that you could, adjacent emotions would be some of the easier ones to move between. So, a brief history of emotion and aging. We started with this idea that depression and sadness should increase with aging. I think still in the sort of in popular conventional wisdom, and I think in some medical schools, it still seems to be a pretty widely accepted idea that if you're old, you ought to be sad. If I was old, I'd be sad. You're not young anymore. Which actually probably turns out to be a good thing. Research actually pretty quickly on, sort of at least as early as the 70s, it was pretty clear that life satisfaction didn't change all that much from middle age into the later years. And then as people looked more specifically at happiness and sadness and depression and so forth, you again got this all the evidence came back that at least from middle age, maybe probably even as early as age 30 or so, you fell into kind of a fairly stable pattern that didn't change that much, at least up into the young old years. And then actually, as we looked at